So, what are rectangle symmetries, and what can you fold with them? Today I'm going to be focused on a couple different tessellations that illustrate these rectangle symmetries, and I'm going to demonstrate one of the simpler ones that fully fits this definition on a 16-fold square grid. So if you've got a grid, go ahead and bring that out. I'll be using it later on today. But if not, here's an explanation so you can be gridding while you learn. So first up, rectangle symmetries. What does that really mean? So this is a term that I developed for myself, where I've been working through like, okay, what are the triangle, the square, the hexagon symmetries? The remaining ones that I have noticed in my folding are rectangle, parallelogram, and linear. And that's really all the buckets that repeating patterns fall into. At least if we're talking about repeating patterns on 2D surfaces, which we are with origami tessellations, repeating geometric patterns folded from a single sheet of paper. So rectangle symmetries in particular are different from square symmetries because they do not have a position of fourfold rotational symmetry. And they do use mirror symmetries. So the rectangle in this case is the bounding box around the repeating unit. And then you have mirror symmetric boundaries on each side of that rectangle. So let's go through a couple examples, and then we'll look at how you can use this to plan your own tessellations. So first up, these three examples in pink here actually have some rotational symmetry inside of the rectangle. So the diagrams that I'm going to show don't match exactly with these three in particular, but we can apply the same idea whether we have rotational symmetry inside the block or not. And often when we have blocks of 4, like all of these patterns that are visible, we will have some rotational symmetry inside, just not fourfold. And if you want an explanation of what I mean by fourfold rotational symmetry, go back to the square symmetries video and check that out. So when we have these blocks of twists, now this one might look like all the twists are on the same side of the paper, but there's actually twists, same number of twists on the back too, because these come in blocks of 2 on one side, 2 on the other side. And then we get our mirror lines between one block and the next. So here I chose all closed square twists. I call this pattern Skew Lines. And you can make different choices as well. So if you choose a similar structure, so 4 twists in a block, and this time alternate between closed and open. And in this one, I gave it enough space so that the twists themselves align with each other on either side of the block. So then we've got our single block here, and we want to mirror this out. So where do we put the boundaries of the mirror lines? Well, for me, I don't want to have a bunch of layers overlapping all on top of each other. So I choose to put my mirror symmetry lines out where the folded parts of the twist meet the next grid line out. So on the back side here, where the mountain fold of this pleat coming from the twist lays down, that's where I put my mirror symmetry lines, and I get this lovely tessellation. Now, what if these two closed squares were actually spaced closer in? What if they had this structure instead of, so here instead of here? These are very much the same idea, but by pulling them closer together, we get a completely different effect in the tessellation. And you might notice there is an extra space vertically as well, and we could pull those even tighter together in that direction and get another different tessellation where these squares then would not line up. So we've got two very similar tessellations. One of them has a meander in the squares on the back, and one of them just does straight lines. But it has two the same and then two mirrored. So that's those patterns. What if we use different twists? Instead of closed and open, what if we throw a hybrid square into the mix? And I'm going to be doing my demonstration with hybrid square twist because that is a form of a square twist that does not have rotational symmetry in and of itself. And so it's a good demonstration for this particular kind of symmetry. So our mirror lines here, you can see that we have blocks of 4 open squares and blocks of 4 hybrid squares. Now, when I folded this tessellation, I didn't expect that anyone would be seeing this side of it. So I wasn't particularly picky about what orientation my hybrid squares were squashed down in. You'll see more about the orientation of the hybrid square in the demonstration. So one dead giveaway for positions of mirror symmetry are these blocks of 4. Specifically, there's mirror symmetry in both directions in these blocks of 4, and so we can say, okay, there's my square, or rectangle rather, that I'm mirroring out all over to create the full pattern. So we get this interesting weave effect where these bars are dropping down, coming back up, down and up, down and up, while the other neighboring bars are going straight through. And in the opposite direction, all the bars are going straight through. And this is an artifact of the symmetry type where we have our mirror symmetries. So on this side, our mirror block is going to come through these straight bars, and specifically through straight bars that go through blocks of 4. So it's not going to go through this bar because what's on this side is not the same as what's on this side. So we can say, okay, hybrid, open, hybrid, open. This is my block of 4 that is getting mirrored everywhere. This is the root of this tessellation. And once I can find the root of the tessellation, then I can apply that to any grid size that I like. Once I understand the tessellation, that's really the point of these symmetries videos. Once I understand the root of the tessellation, I can fold it on any grid size that I want. I'm not stuck to having someone recommend a grid size. I'm not stuck to whatever grid size the crease pattern is on. I can find the root and apply it wherever I like. So another example with mirror symmetries, we've got our mirror symmetric blocks, our mirror symmetry lines that are going through the blocks of 4. And these are compound square twists. I do have a tutorial for these twists up on YouTube. And they have an interesting relationship to each other because they don't need to change when they're connected one to the other, because they have this bidirectional pleat structure. And so I can link them together and have the same rotational sense for each of these two. And then I'm taking this block of 2 and mirroring it everywhere. So we've got these two that mirror over this vertical line to these two, and they mirror over the horizontal line up to this line. And I can fill the whole paper with that. Rotate so you can see it a little bit more, and get all of my paper filled no matter what size of paper I choose to use. Now, a counter example. Here I have a block of 4, but it doesn't have a mirror symmetry line through it, and it's actually 4-fold rotationally symmetric. So this particular arrangement of blocks I would call a square symmetry instead of a rectangle symmetry. But that's really just the addition of the 4-fold rotational symmetry, where looking from here, we see the same thing in 4 directions. But outside of that, we do have the same mirrored structure where we have our mirror lines between our blocks that are getting repeated and mirrored as they go. So next up, another counterexample. Here we can see that there are pairs of twists. And so there's lines of mirror symmetry really hitting between every other column of twists. So I've got column 1, column 2, and every other one we get this line of vertical mirror symmetry, but we don't actually have any horizontal mirror symmetry. So there's mirror symmetry in only one direction. And that's what I'm going to call a linear symmetry instead of a rectangle symmetry. Now, it looks really similar to the other weave pattern we were looking at. And the way that you can distinguish the two is, are there blocks of 4 that the mirror symmetry lines go through, or are there just blocks of 2? So there's some examples, some counter examples. Let's take a look at the more abstract view, the theoretical sense, and see what we can see from there. So looking at a square tiling, so this is where each block represents a single square twist. And the red is for right-handed, the white is for left-handed. And we have to have this 2-colorability condition unless we're using compound twists, as we saw earlier. So in these symmetries, we can do our mirror lines around a single twist, which is what I'll be demonstrating with the hybrid square twists. And you'll see here I have 4 different colors of 2-fold rotational symmetries. That's because each corner of the twist, if the twist itself is not rotationally symmetric, is distinct. And you can tell these apart. And this is a common feature. If your highest symmetry is a 2-fold rotational symmetry, and you have 2 directions of mirror symmetry lines, you're going to, and actually even with just 1 direction of mirror symmetry lines, you're going to end up with 4 distinct positions of 2-fold rotational symmetry. So we get to play with these symmetries, and this holds up whether we're mirroring around 1 twist, around 2 twists, zoom out a bit, or around 4 or even more twists. We can pick an arbitrary rectangle that we want to then mirror across our tessellation. Well, all of the examples that I showed were on the square tiling. They used only squares. Are there any other examples of tilings that we could use this symmetry type on? And actually, there are. So the 8 and 4 right triangles symmetry type, if we look at the maximum mirror symmetries, has mirror symmetries that overlie the mirror symmetries on a square tiling. And so you can do this a couple different ways. You can use these rectangle symmetries around a cluster of 2 twists, 2 right triangle twists. And I've done a few tessellations with this. You end up with loops of 8 that have a lot of the shared properties. And yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to use these right triangle twists to create larger tessellations. This particular one, actually, the loops of 8 aren't as spectacular, but it looks like you have groups of 4 that are then repeating all over, but in reality, those groups of 4 are exactly those groups of 4 that have the mirror symmetries going straight through them. So there's the version with 2 twists together. As with squares, we can add more twists into a square. Here we have the potential for twofold rotational symmetry in the middle of the cluster, just like we do with the square tiling. And we can really, again, draw any rectangle we want and then mirror it out. The larger your rectangle, the more grid you're going to need to really see those repeats, but whatever you want to fold. So that concludes the theory side. Let's do some practice with this. And let's grab our 16-fold grid. So that's 16 divisions left to right, 16 divisions top to bottom. And the first thing I'm going to do here is find the center of my grid. So on any grid, to find the center, you can fold it in half in one direction. So exactly in half there. And then fold it in half in another direction. And that'll give you your center point. So opening up, I've got this center point, and I want to put a hybrid square twist on here. Now I do have a full tutorial on the hybrid square twist, but let's go through it in real time. So I'm going to select one of the center lines, and if I was doing a closed square twist, I would put my 4th mountain out on the opposite side of my 3rd mountain. But since this is a hybrid square twist, one direction will align the mountains like a closed square, and then the other direction will space those mountains one spacing apart like an open square. So this is hybridizing between the closed and the open square twist. Now, since I've drawn it this way, I have an obligation to rotate my twist right-handedly. I cannot have the valleys of the pleat of one mountain run into the mountain of the pleat of the next. So I need to have my valleys run out in this orientation. And so if I put my thumb up in the middle of the twist with my fingers running along the mountain, curl my fingers, I should hit the valley of that same pleat if it's right-handed. Now, if it was left-handed, then these two would need to swap places. And we'll get to that as we're folding out more. So from here, I want to bring up my central line as a mountain, and then bring up each of my 2 vertical mountains as well. And I'm going to find the valleys, first my horizontals, and then my verticals. And you'll notice this really doesn't want to squash. problem, right? But what we're going to do is squash it one bit at a time. We're going to get this structure, and for the first one, I'm going to strongly recommend finding the corner on the inside where it looks like we have a diagonal going in towards that next grid intersection. We want everything to end up at grid intersections. This side looks like it wants to go to that next grid intersection. So I'm going to squash this side of it first. Now, if you haven't done this before, I'm going to strongly recommend that you rotate whatever side you're squashing first to face you. I just wanted to be clear on the references. And you want it to face you so you can see up into that corner. Now there's a couple ways to squash this twist. We can get just this half, the square, the closed half, in place first, and then immediately open the open half on top. Or we can pinch this all the way closed. We can bring this all the way closed. So what we've got here is like if we had a completely closed square twist, and here's a trick on closing square twists with rigid folding. If we have the completely closed square twist and then we open it up and take one of the pleats, mountain, valley, and flip it so it lays on top in the other direction. That's what we have at this point. But wait, there's more. There's a further step. You see this valley is drawn not where this valley is folded, but on the other side of the mountain. So we're going to need to open this flap out. And here, if you've seen my video on right triangle twists, you'll notice I have a horizontal, a vertical, and a diagonal. So we get a right triangle twist, which is exactly the same as half of an open square twist, sitting on top of half of our closed square twist. And that's how we get the hybrid. Now from here, I'm going to be mirroring this twist all over the rest of the paper. And you'll notice this isn't exactly centered in the exact center of the paper. I have my center, I marked it as this point here, but the actual center of this twist is halfway between this mountain and this mountain, or somewhere along this line, and we can think of it as being centered right here. So halfway along the space between the two pleats and in line with the two pleats in the other direction. And seen from the back side, it's pretty clear that these pleats are two-fold rotationally symmetric, so I can take them this way, and I can spin them around and take them this way, and you can't tell the difference except that this side is a little bit shorter than this side. So flipping back, I'm going to arrange it how I had it in the original setup, and I'm going to mirror this twist all around my paper. So first, where do I put these mirror symmetry boundaries? I'm going to put them at the edges of the folded parts of the twist. So I'm going to end up with pleats coming together into tubes, not overlapping each other, because if you're overlapping each other, then you're not actually mirror symmetric because there's a top pleat and a bottom pleat and they're not the same. And I'm going to do this for all 4 sides of my initial twist. Now this box that I'm drawing has different dimensions in the 2 directions, the horizontal and the vertical directions. In one direction, its folded distance is 2 spacings, and in the other direction, 3 spacings. In reality, if you're looking at a raw grid before you folded anything, you need to add 2 spacings to each of those to account for the 2 spacings that are under a pleat in each direction. So from here, I'm going to pick a direction, and I want to set up my next hybrid twist in this direction. I can see from here that the vertical direction is my direction that's elongated. And so I'm going to let my vertical mountain carry all the way through. And my horizontal mountain is going to shift over 1. I can also see that this horizontal mountain needs to match the pleat on the other side of the mirror symmetry line. And as I do this, I'm going to be picky about how my closed and open ends are lining up, and do first one and then the other. Now, if this is your first time folding hybrid square twists, I would not be too picky about which end is open and which end is closed, because that's kind of a more advanced thing to be managing. But either way you want to do it is fine, as long as you get it folded. So rotating around, I'm going to show this side before this side, because these pleats are pointing away from each other. We're going to have less conflict. And then I'll show how to set up 2 at once on the other side. So I know that I need to have paper touching the tip here. And I'll leave this vertical just as a pleat overlap there. And I need to have the extension going in this horizontal direction. So my horizontal line will stay mountain all the way through. My vertical will shift over 1. And here I want my closed bit to be up top, because the closed bit of the one across the mirror symmetry line is up top. So since I have a lot of expertise with these, I can kind of finagle them while looking from the wrong side. But I want to rotate around and get everything smoothed out under here before I squash my right triangle on top. And then I want to follow my pleats to the pleat overlap and take care of that twist as well. Again, the stretching out is going to happen in the horizontal direction. And we want to match closed bits with the ones on other sides of the mirror symmetry line. So to force that, I'm going to pinch my paper to get this closed area set up. You'll notice this is pulling up on the pleat going down. And then I will squash the top of my hybrid square. Then from here, I said I was going to do this tube pleat next. So rotating around, so I have good access to work on things, I'm going to have pleats come in and touch the twist neighboring this one, and the extension direction is going to mean that the pleat going between these twists is one off, one further down than the pleats that go up and touch. So I can go ahead and get both of these in place. My closed bits are going to be on the insides because they're matching these two up here. And I can get those into place. I can even bring this top all the way up if I want to get that smoothed out. And then I'll open my right triangle twists on top, so that open half of the hybrid square. And get everything folded into place. Then rotating around, I'm going to do another tube, but this time the extension direction is horizontal. So I've got a pleat coming up to match that mirror symmetric boundary. And this one here on the left is running into another pleat. It's going to stay as a pleat overlap. This time, the mountain running across the tube matches the mountains running out on either side, and the extension of the vertical going further down is what I will shift outwards in this case. So getting these in place, I want the closed bits to be on the outer edges. This one is going down really nicely. This one is going to need some finagling. I'll get this twist on the right-hand side all situated before I come back to that one on the left. And aren't you glad that this isn't something in person where you'd have to be remembering all these steps right away? This is recorded. The recording will be released immediately, and you can see that in as many repetitions and slow it down and speed it up and as many variations as you like. So this twist, I want to get the closed side over here. Right now the closed side wants to be up here. So what do? Well, I pinch this portion and all of a sudden it's looking a lot more like a closed square twist down here. And then I can go in, flatten the closed bit, and bring up my open bit. And last but not least, I've got one more pleat overlap here that I can open up. I'm going to take the extension of this vertical pleat, bring it in so it can meet at the mirror symmetric boundary with the neighboring twist. And as with these other two down here, I want the closed bit to be down below. So I'll pinch a bit there, pull a bit here, push a bit on the top. I'm gonna poke it with my bone folder to get right to that grid intersection. And then open the flap on top, squashing my hybrid square twist in place. Now, if you didn't know how to fold this hybrid square twist straight from the grid, it would be a royal pain to pre-crease. There's let's see, 1, 2, 3 straight diagonals, and then these 3 longer lines on top, and they're not all going in the same directions. This diagonal is a valley, whereas these two are mountains. And the collapse would be a pain too. How much better is it to be able to fold straight from the grid? No worries, no fuss. For me, this is the only way to fold. And I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek because I have pre-creased and collapsed, but there's just no substitute for being able to fold the grid and immediately go into folding what you had planned to fold, which is what I did for all of these demonstration pieces, including the compound squares. Like, actually, especially the compound squares, because those would also be a royal pain to pre-crease and collapse, especially the pre-creasing, because there's some tiny angles, especially right in here, and with this pleat that crosses other pleats, like, so much easier to fold straight from the grid. And that's really what I think origami tessellations are about. The freedom to fold what you want, when you want, on the size of grid that you want. And that's really what I'm trying to do for my students. I'm trying to get them to that level where they can fold whatever they want on whatever grid they want and not feel like it's some magical collapse that may or may not work at the last second. No, tessellations can be folded in straightforward ways. And I'm glad you're taking an interest to learn more. And to get started folding tessellations, really the grid is the starting point. So I put a link down below to check out my series on gridding, tessellation foundations. That also introduces the basic twists, and you can see more about the basic twists in my series on the basic twists here on YouTube. So I'd love to know what you're folding these days, and also what you're interested in seeing here on the Gathering Folds YouTube channel. So feel free, drop a comment right in the chat, and I will be happy to teach you whatever your heart desires. Now, if it's something super advanced, I'm not going to spend 3 hours on a live stream, but I am happy to teach fundamental methods and tips and tricks for getting things folded without wasting an entire grid. So with that, happy folding, y'all. Have a great rest of your week, and I will see you next week.